Welcome, everybody, to a brand new podcast here on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel, eXhuming the X-Files, where each Friday we traverse the conspiracy-laden labyrinth that is the X-Files TV show. My name is Matthew. Joining me tonight, fresh off of our discussion of the Stephen King film Graveyard Shift, which you can also view here on the YouTube channel, is Jeremy.
Hey, everybody.
Now, I pitched an idea to you, Jeremy. I said, hey, I'm thinking about rewatching the X-Files. Would you be interested in discussing it with me as we go through? And your response was?
I had been craving to watch X-Files for some time, and I was actually already into it a little bit, and I said, sure, why the hell not?
Very cool. I always love talking this kind of stuff with you, so I'm glad that we could sort of connect in this way, just randomly. Hey, I'm going to watch it. And you're like, well, I'm already watching it. Let's go ahead and do it. So should be cool. So basically, each Friday, we're just going to have a new episode up where we're going to talk about a specific episode through, I guess, series order. So we're just starting with season 1. We'll work our way through. And before we get into the very first episode, which is Pilot, which I have a lot of thoughts on because I think it brought back a lot of memories for me. I wanted to discuss, why do you like this show? Because I know we were big into this show when we were in high school. This was kind of like must-see, or maybe it was like junior high even when it first started, I guess.
Sure.
1993, so what I would have been 12, 12 years old when this came on. Why did you love this show so much?
Oh, man. Just going back to the beginning, I think I was 2 or 3, and my mom took me to go to the drive-in movie theater in Columbus, Nebraska, and she sat me on the hood of her car, and we watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And watching that
Great movie.
doomed me to a lifetime of pursuing weird-ass shit, books about, well, it started really with the Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown series. You remember that
Oh, yeah.
huge tome? Oh my god. And I just knew a bunch of nerdy shit about, aliens and crystal skulls and Bigfoot, and then all of a sudden the show shows up in our life that becomes instantly must see TV every single Friday.
Yeah, and for the young viewers, they don't seem to. I mean, everything's at the touch of their fingertips at this point in time. You can pull up the X Files on Hulu and watch any episode you want. Back then, you literally had to sit in front of the television at like 7 o'clock on Friday nights or whenever it was on. Otherwise, if you missed it, you missed it, and they might not re-show that episode for months, before you'd have a chance to get it. So it was kind of like appointment television back then. There were no DVRs. You might be able to get away with getting a friend to record it for you on VHS or something, and then hand it over at school on Monday, like, oh yeah, here's a new episode of X Files or something like that.
But don't tell me nothing about it.
Yeah, exactly. But it was just much more difficult. And back then it was, it hit me in that time of my life because the 90s were great if you're interested in aliens. I remember like the T-shirt, the many moods of an alien. That was like culturally significant at the time. I remember like on Fox the alien autopsy video that they showed, and you're like, wow, it was a big thing, especially in the early to mid '90s about aliens. And this show hit at just the right time
Just the
where
right time.
I was into that stuff. And do you remember? I don't even remember what exactly the context was. Do you remember you and I going to the Bramer Center after school, and those weird people came by and they were like trying to? It was almost like Chariots of the Gods, where they were showing all the alien stuff in the Bible. And do you remember that?
The Tower of Babel. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
We went to. Did we go once or did we go like a couple of times and then it started just turning from really cool shit to just
We went
talking about God?
a couple times at least. And then I think we were like, is this like a cult sort of thing? Are they trying to
Yeah.
brainwash us into weird stuff? So, but we went, I think they gave us like a free pamphlet or something that had a whole bunch of weird, Eric Von Daniken, Chariot of the Gods type stuff. But just setting that up, that we were the target audience for this TV
For this
show
show. Yep.
when it came out. And I was actually really curious to go back and rewatch this because it's probably in my top 5 of all time favorite TV shows. Going back and like, is it going to hold up? Because that's the thing you always worry about, right? You're like, man, if I go back and I watch this, will it ruin kind of like that nostalgia, that childhood I had, or will it hold up and be just as good? And we're going to find out on this show every Friday as we go through. So we're going to start with season one. And the very first episode here is called Pilot, the literal pilot episode of The X Files. It was directed by a guy named Robert Mandel, who is probably most famous. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, The Substitute, with Tom Berenger. I
Yeah.
think it came out. Yeah, yeah, he directed that. So he
All
also
right.
directed the pilot episode of The X Files. This was actually written by Chris Carter. Chris Carter, of course, is the creator of The X Files. He was kind of like, the face of it. I remember being like, wow, anything Chris Carter puts out, I'm going to watch. Like
Sure.
Millennium comes out, going to watch that. Lone Gunman, going to watch that.
Mm.
He was pretty ubiquitous and a big sort of showrunner back in the time. Pretty culturally relevant, we shall say. And this first aired on Friday, September 10th, 1993. Now, I couldn't actually remember. Do you remember? Did you watch this right from the very beginning, or did you catch X Files like of a later episode into its run?
No, because I don't want to get too far down the line, but I do remember specifically the X being painted on the road
Okay.
during this episode and it
Yeah.
coming back and being a huge thing.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm pretty sure, I can't be 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I watched this when I saw the pilot episode when it came out. I'm probably, I probably saw the commercials that were on Fox and I was like, wow, that looks interesting, and saw it. But yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Pilot. Air date Friday, September 10th, 1993, takes place in Belfleur, Oregon. Give us kind of like the basic premise of this. Who are these characters that we're following and what are they doing?
What it starts with this kid running through the woods and then all of a sudden a brilliant flash of light and it's implied that there's an alien ship there basically. Then it cuts over to Mulder and Scully being asked to, or by the FBI, that we have this loose cannon in our ranks that is just kind of a weirdo, and we want to kind of drum him out of the
Spooky.
FBI. So we need you as to be his partner, to watch what he's doing, to give us detailed reports, to basically debunk his entire office so that they could just get rid of him. And then they go out to Oregon. They have a few adventures. We don't really see anything of value, but it kind of sparks Scully, the or laced character's interest instead of just writing off the main character in Fox as kind of a weirdo. Is maybe he's just hyper passionate about this stuff, and that
Yeah.
a lot of what he has to say is grounded in scientific reality. It's just really fucking hard to explain sometimes.
Yeah, one of the things I love about how they set this up is Mulder. He comes across, to 12-year-old Matthew as the coolest character I've ever seen. It's like this guy just he gets free range, carte blanche to just go investigate aliens and monsters and stuff. And he can't like the FBI is trying to get rid of him, but they can't because he mentions in this that he's got quote unquote connections in Congress that allow him to do the X Files, which are these cases that the FBI kind of shoves to the side and they don't really investigate because there's truth to them, but they don't really want to look into them. And yeah, this was just it was like, hey, we're getting right into alien stuff right away.
Right
They
off the bat,
they don't like, hey, here's a couple monster things. It's like this show, we're gonna talk aliens. We're gonna talk aliens.
right?
But yeah, I like well, what are your thoughts on the overall pilot episode? This is the first taste anyone got of the X Files. What were your thoughts?
Compared to some like first or pilot episodes of television shows aren't normally this good, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed.
You get you get a little bit of a taste of what the show might represent, but they don't kind of go full bore into the story. They kind of they let things breathe for a little while. But this one, they just kind of swung for the fence. It felt like. Now there's a lot of pieces of it, like a couple of the characters that were acting from the FBI side, a couple of the locations that look cheap, not really
Yeah.
realistic as far as what I'm used to. But as far as the acting, the performances, the subject matter, like they didn't shy away from anything. It's like they just put it out on Front Street. This is what the show is about. Do you like it?
Yeah, and this does exactly what a pilot episode should do. it like you said, it gives you a flavor of everything. It shows you who Mulder is. I love the moments of humor from Mulder in this. I love that you establish right away Scully is the skeptic, right? She's based in science and she doesn't believe in any of this stuff. And Mulder has that great line about, well, once if you gosh, I can't say it like he does, but he basically says like, hey, man, once you've ruled out science, might you not go to the fantastic as a plausible possibility to what's going on. And it was just, to me as a kid, you're 12, 13-year old, you're looking at this like you're thinking about all this creative stuff. Like you're wondering about this. And here's like an adult in the FBI who's, basically got your point of view, right? And he's spouting it out, and he's basically flipping off the people who disagree with him because his nickname is Spooky Mulder. They do a great job of sort of setting up that Mulder is kind of like the black sheep of the FBI. He's well known. People think it's not just his supervisor; it's everybody in the FBI thinks he's a kook. They do a really good job of sort of setting that up. We get introduced to the cigarette smoking man. We don't know who he is at that point in time. He does. I don't even think he speaks in this episode. But they set him up. He becomes a huge character. So you get that initial sort of like conspiracy stuff that's going on. The entire storyline revolves around these people from the class of '89, I think, that are getting abducted. And even though like there's one guy who's like catatonic and he gets up and he runs through the forest, and Scully notices he's got all the mud on his feet and stuff like that. So it sort of pushes her sort of skepticism right from the get-go. And yeah, you're right, it's exciting. You get the alien, you get the X, the missing time and stuff like that. You get all the aliens and you watch this episode and you're like, okay, I want to watch next week. Like,
Right.
what's going to happen next week?
Yeah, it was. This one had a lot going for it, as far as like, well, you had this hot like redheaded girl, and you had this semi good looking like super nerdy guy that was just. It was all of our idol. It's all who we wanted to be back then.
Oh yeah, yeah. And what I really love, there's a moment in this episode that I really love that sort of sets the template for the Scully Mulder relationship going forward. Now there's a few weird things in this episode that I'll sort of get to, just sort of things I observed that later on, because again, this is a pilot. So they're just trying to basically sell this thing to Fox and get Fox to jump on board and be like, okay, yeah, go ahead and make 21 more episodes of this where we're greenlighting this thing and go. So people got to just remember back then, anyway, a pilot episode was they made it, they film it, they would show it to the Fox executives, and they would yay or nay it whether or not they were going to spend the money to make it a full series. So yeah, they really tried to put all their stuff in. And Chris Carter later on down the road in the series, I think his writing gets a little bad as we get to some of the later seasons, but I feel like he had such an energetic streak, right? It's like a band to me. A band who puts out like 16 Stone by Bush is fucking
Sure.
great. And then everything after that kind of sucks. Like all your creative stuff is put into that initial thing. But there's a moment in here that I really, really love, and it is the whole back and forth between Scully and Mulder. Scully's a skeptic. She's skeptical of everything Mulder's saying. He comes up with these fantastical theories, and she's like, no, 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 it's probably just this, it's probably just that. But there's a moment when she realizes, oh my gosh, this is a fantastic thing. This is clearly what happened. And Mulder is the one that says, hey, you got to calm down here and you got to look at it basically from your scientific perspective. And she's like, why? And he's like, because you got to write that in your report. And I love that Mulder sort of brings her back to earth. Like immediately she is kind of on his side by the end of this episode, but he's the one that's like, you got to chill out. I'm the one with the crazy stuff here. You gotta look at this more analytically. And I love that dynamic and that relationship with them going forward, especially later on. Because I didn't personally, I don't like it when they go later on in the series, and then of course they hook up and they get together and stuff like that. I always love the dynamic of them as just friends. Like they start out as like colleagues that respect each other, and then they just become like really great friends. How did you feel like the dynamics between the two played out in this pilot episode?
Well, it was they're a great pair of lead characters. They play off of each other really, really well. You can see that through their acting, there is a relationship that's established throughout that series. And I do agree with you to a point about the love part of it. That seems to be shoehorned into a lot of stuff. However, I've always enjoyed the sexual tension between the two of them. If it had never
Oh,
gone
sure.
beyond there, I would have been just fine with it.
Sure, sure. I think that sexual tension is one thing, but then sort of like taking that extra step for them to act on it. I don't remember which movie it was, but I remember one of the movies. It's not the first one, it must have been the second one. Like the movie opens with like this tracking shot, and then you see Mulder, and then like Scully's in bed with him, whatever. And I just remember it being in the theater and being like, oh, really? That's where we're going with this? Like, it the show lost some momentum when it kind of went that route. But yeah, I think the second, like the sexual chemistry of it's great, because I think most people have that person in their lives at some point where it's like, I'm really good friends with this person, and man, it would be great to hook up with them, but I don't want to screw it up because they're my friend. I'm a really
Sure.
great friend of that person. So I agree with you. The sexual chemistry was a component to it for sure. Couple things I just facts that I found out about this episode, which I thought were kind of interesting. This was shot in 14 days in Vancouver, so Vancouver, Canada, and they went all the way up to, I think the first 5 seasons were shot in Vancouver, Canada, until David Duchovny was like, "You move this to Los Angeles, or I quit." And then they moved to Los Angeles. This had a $2 million budget, so they put a good chunk of change. I don't know what that is in today's money, but there was a good chunk of change that went into this pilot. Interesting enough, Fox executives did not like Gillian Anderson as Scully, and they wanted her replaced. They loved David Duchovny as Mulder, but they thought Gillian Anderson just was not good as Scully. So, what are you? I'm going to put you in the mind of Chris Carter, Jeremy. You're showing the pilot to all the suits at Fox, and they're like, "Excellent, recast Scully." What
I
what is your rebuttal to that?
Well, you got to remember that you said that this was September 10th, or 1993.
Yes.
So in our culture back then, Friday night television, like, do you remember TGIF? Thank God
Oh
it's
yeah.
Friday. That was
Yeah.
the biggest day of the week. You
Yep.
had you were going up
Family
against
Matters and all that.
yeah,
Yeah.
America's Funniest Home Videos, Family Matter, like CBS, ABC, NBC, and Fox were all competing heavily for that time. So to get a weird ass show like this greenlit in that particular time slot would have been, it was huge. It would have been a huge gamble for execs at Fox. So if they came back and said this change needed to happen, I I don't know. I mean, she's not really an established actress.
Yeah.
David Duchovny was doing the Red Shoe Diaries before this, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah.
So he had on film chops. So if they came back and said you need to change this girl out, and I was really trying to get into that Friday slot at this point in television, yeah, I probably would have had to recast her.
Yeah, and I think that, to be fair to Gillian Anderson, or I guess to be fair to the Fox executives, I don't think she comes across as great in this episode as she does in other episodes. You can tell she's pretty green in this, just in the way, like the inflection and the tone, and how she responds to certain things. I could see somebody looking at her and being like, yeah, you could probably get somebody else in here that's a little better at this. But Chris Carter went to bat for her, and he wouldn't back down. And I think it's all the best for it. I mean, cinematic or television history happened after that, because of course Scully and Gillian Anderson kind of ubiquitous with that role now. I mean, that's one of the most famous, sort of strong female roles that was on television, was Scully. So interesting that they didn't want her, but glad that they stuck with her for sure, because she got a lot better. Even in the subsequent episodes, she got a lot better than she was in this pilot, acting wise, I think. They finished post production on this episode just 3 hours before they were required to screen it to Fox executives, which I thought was interesting. Like, they were scrambling to get this thing done. Um, the swirling leaves vortex that occurs at the beginning and the end of the episode was actually done with early use of CGI, and was incredibly tedious and difficult to pull off. I'm not a computer effects guy, but I still remember when I watched this, when I rewatched this, I was like, that looks really good. Like, it still looked good. Did it look good to you? Like the swirling leaves and all that?
I could say this about all of the abduction parts of it, and we'll probably revisit this conversation over and over and over again. But the bright lights, the levitations, the swirling leaves, like how they represent the UFO just over the edge of that next hill. Like they've always done it and done it so cheaply, it seems, but to great effect.
Yeah, and it's a very dynamic visual, like because it happens right at the beginning, and I think it literally kind of like sucks you in because you're like, what in the hell am I just watching? It just looks cool with the leaves swirling around, but apparently those are all digital. The effect still looks good to this day. So good job on them for doing that. The other interesting thing that I'll point out about this episode, as I was reading up about it, there were a number of Scully related deleted scenes. Now I have all the DVD box sets. I don't know if these deleted scenes are on there or not. I'll have to go check. But from what I read, before she's introduced in the episode, there were a couple scenes showing her teaching at Quantico and then arriving at the FBI headquarters, and there were also two scenes with her and her boyfriend Ethan. And Fox executives felt there should be a romance angle in the show and that Scully should have a boyfriend because there was no romantic chemistry between her and Mulder. Uh, Chris Carter cut the scenes because he felt Scully's relationship to the FBI and her partner was more important than a side story involving her having a boyfriend. And that's weird to think about because I don't think, do we ever see Scully with a boyfriend in this show? Like, I don't remember that at all. I always feel like, I distinctly remember Mulder always being interested in porn. That was always a running joke. He doesn't like having girlfriends, but he's really into porn. But I don't think I remember anything with Scully with a boyfriend. Do you?
I'm trying. I think I might be thinking about a different show, but I think later on, yeah, she has a guy in her life in the later.
Okay. And maybe there's a moment where she's like someone's trying to like set her up with somebody. I'm thinking like for whatever reason, Beyond the Sea or something is something that I remember, the one with Brad Dourif, which is awesome. I think it's in season one. Um, yeah, so I think that's kind of interesting. I would like to see those deleted scenes. I haven't looked for them or anything, but just to see who this mystery Ethan character was, and just the funniness that they're like, she's got no chemistry with David Duchovny. She's got none. So
Absurd. Absurd.
she's got none at all. And I did read that that Gillian Anderson's only regret about this episode is she did not like the fact that she goes to basically Mulder essentially in her underwear to have him look at the bumps that are on her back, kind of down by her butt, and she felt that was kind of like trying to make Scully, just showing a little
The
TNA, which
damsel.
wasn't needed. And I kind of agree with that, but then but I also agree with Chris Carter's take. Chris Carter said that what he wrote it that way specifically to show that Mulder was not somebody who was just trying to get with her, that it was like a completely platonic relationship, and that was how you were kind of establishing she felt safe around him, that he wasn't going to do something to her, and there wasn't going to be a lovey dovey sort of romantic thing there, which I can see both ways, honestly. It never really bothered me at all, but yeah, Gillian
It's
Anderson guys kind of had a problem with it.
it's the weirdo embrace that happened afterward. Like their relationship hadn't been
Yeah,
established at that point, and like if he looked at it, let her know that it was just a couple of mosquito bites and she got a great deal of relief out of it. Fine. Don't like snuggle up to him
yeah.
immediately afterwards. Like, oh, thanks for saving.
He's like holding a candle too. It's weird. It's a weird scene. It's a
It
very
is.
weird scene. I also would be remiss. This is the first time, again, this pilot setting the stage of what the show will be is what a pilot should do. We get the story of Samantha Mulder. Mulder talks to Scully in the hotel room. So, give the listeners out there who have never seen this show, what is the deal with Samantha Mulder?
When Mulder was 12 and or his younger sister was 8, something happened where she was abducted by aliens. Now, I don't think they talk about her being abducted by aliens in the first episode, or is it one of the next ones?
I think it's one of the next ones. I don't think he necessarily he might have used the word abducted, but
She
I don't
went
think he says
missing.
aliens. Yeah, I don't
No,
think he says aliens.
yeah, no, I think, yeah, he doesn't get that specific with it, but you kind of see in this episode that it's something that bothers him, that drives him. He said he went through hypnotherapy and started dredging up stuff, but I don't think they got into specifics in this
Yeah.
episode about
Just kind of like setting up that he's driven, right? He's a very driven character, and that's part of the reason why he is so obsessed with investigating the X Files, is because he believes there's going to be something in there that's going to lead him to finding out what happened to his sister, because that is a big mystery for much of the X Files. For many seasons going forward, it is like what has happened to Samantha Mulder, and that's kind of like the linchpin overarching mystery of the show. And when we eventually get down to seasons 5, 6, 7, did they stick the landing with that? We'll see. We'll see. Gets a little. What's the word I'm looking for? It gets a little confusing. Maybe some decisions that maybe it should have just been kind of left, but we'll get there. We're getting ahead of ourselves. But
it. Sure.
yeah, that's sort of the overarching sort of thing there. So yeah, the only question I really had about this episode is I wanted to ask you. There's a sequence early on when Mulder and Scully are driving to the town, and there's the missing time. So you get that kind of like bright flash. There's that awful, horrible slow motion that I hate. That's like super like janky and whatnot. And then Mulder gets out. He, you know, is all excited because he had earlier in the episode he had sprayed an X because there's like this all the electronics in the car start going haywire. So he stops and he sprays the X. He doesn't quite trust her yet because she's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I just call it a hunch." Right. And then later on in the episode, they're driving down that same road and then boom, bright light and there's missing time, like, I don't know, 9 or 12 minutes or something like that. I wanted to ask you, what happened to Mulder and Scully there? Did they actually get abducted or what? Because it's never quite explained what
um,
happened.
I you're I I don't know if I'm remembering this right, and I'm jumping way ahead down the line, but I do believe that there's an episode in either I think it's in season 4, where they're driving in Oregon, and then all of a sudden, some like he finds himself in a time skip and just horks on the brakes, gets out and finds this ancient X he had painted on the road, and I think that moment kicks off the entire um Dana Scully alien baby storyline. You remember that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I do.
I think that they were abducted during that time, and they actually had extracted ovum from her and created a clone baby. But that's a conversation way
Okay.
down the road.
Yeah, because there is a point in the show where Gillian Anderson actually got pregnant, and so that she had to leave the show for a while, and I know that they. Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but I'm excited to get to those specifics when we get there because I'm just like, what
Sure.
happened there? But yeah, so yeah, that's pretty much this episode. What are your overall thoughts on it? If you had to wrap up and say the pilot episode? Give me your take on this overall.
You get a lot of recommendations for shows from people, and they always have a habit of saying just the same awful thing. If you could just get through the first season, everything gets better. If you just get through seasons 1 and season 2, it just all of a sudden becomes worth watching. If you sit down and watch this one first episode, just season 1, episode 1, you will have an idea of whether you will like the rest of the show or not, just from how good or how bad your reaction is to just this one episode.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that this show, like this pilot episode, established everything that we're going to love going forward. Yeah, it established these awesome characters. It establishes the overarching conspiracy with the government. Is this the episode? Because I watched like all four of them back to back, but I think this is the episode, right, where we see cigarette smoking man at the very end because they go to a cemetery and Mulder has some hilarious humor, but one of the coffins busts open, and initially you see it looks like an alien, like it literally looks like there's an alien in there, and then of course Scully's doing the autopsy and everything, but she pulls out like this weird implant, this metal implant, and then at the very end when she's doing her report, the FBI is like, "Well, you got no evidence of anything," because some dude comes and torches their hotel room and torches all the photos that Mulder had taken and everything, and Scully's like, "Actually, I got this." and she hands it to him. And then you kind of see at the very end, you see the cigarette smoking man. It reminded me of the final sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're pushing the Ark of the Covenant in this giant warehouse filled with all these other things. Cigarette smoking man comes walking down. He sticks this implant in with a bunch of other of the same implants, and you're like, okay, this guy's a bad guy. Like, I want to know what's up with it. Because you see him like whispering in people's ears through this episode, right? Like when they're interrogating someone at the police station, you just see the cigarette smoking man like whisper, and you're like, this guy's bad news. And you're like, wow, this thing goes so big, and it's at the Pentagon, and they have all kinds of implants. How big is this alien conspiracy? This got 12-year-old me again, appointment television. Like, Mom, whatever we're doing, we have to watch the X-Files next Friday at 7 or 8 or whatever. And I absolutely love it. I think it's a perfect sort of kickoff to what the show is. And incidentally, I didn't find this out till many, many, many years later. So my fiance is a big fan of The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr., starring the great Bruce Campbell. That aired directly after the X-Files season 1. And I had no idea that was even a thing until, gosh, it would have been 15, 16 years later when I was showing her Evil Dead. And she's like, well, yeah, I recognize Bruce Campbell. He's in Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. I'm like, what's that? I had no idea. She's like, it was on right after the X-Files, because she watched the X-Files back then as well. I had no clue, and I felt so stupid.
It was fucking Simpsons, X-Files, Briscoe County, and I want to say Outer Limits was on right after Briscoe County.
Yeah. See, I remember watching Outer Limits, but I had no idea Briscoe County was on. It was probably one of those things that my mom hated Westerns, and so she probably didn't want to watch anything. But I missed out on Briscoe until later on in life, but would love to revisit that for a show in the future, too. But so, ladies and gentlemen, that is episode 1 of eXhuming the X-Files. Next week, we are going to talk episode 2, titled Deep Throat. So, you know what to do. Smash that like and subscribe button, right? Ha ha. All right. See you guys next Friday.
Later.